You know what your problem is, General, Dr. David Kellner said while elbow-deep in the alien's chest cavity. Because apparently Tuesday was the kind of day where you get to perform emergency surgery on a 7-foot-tall insectoid war criminal. You've got 3 hearts, but not one of them is in the right place. The Ketheran general wheezed what might have been a laugh, or possibly the sound of his respiratory system failing. Hard to tell with these bug people. Human, humor. Even while I die. Oh, you're not dying on my watch, buddy. David adjusted his surgical light with his shoulder, since both hands were currently preventing an interstellar incident by way of cardiovascular collapse. I've got a reputation to maintain. Human doctor lets alien general croak is not the headline I want associated with my medical license. The irony wasn't lost on him. 3 weeks ago, this same general had been bombing human colonies. Now here David was, literally holding the bastards' hearts together because apparently the universe had a twisted sense of humor. Besides, David continued, because talking helped him focus, and the alternative was thinking about how absolutely insane the situation was. If you die, who's going to explain to the Galactic Council why a human medic was performing surgery in a Ketheran military bunker during what's technically still a ceasefire? You should not be here, the general managed. Yeah, well, tell that to your aide who dragged me out of the refugee camp at gunpoint. David found the torn artery he'd been looking for. Bingo. Speaking of which, where is Lieutenant Scaryface? I told him to get me more plasma. As if summoned by complaint, the aide scuttled back into the makeshift surgical bay, chittering frantically in Ketheran. David didn't speak the language, but universal panic was pretty easy to translate. Let me guess, David said without looking up from his work. The human fleet just dropped out of hyperspace. You're all about to be vapor, and somehow this is my fault? The aide's chittering intensified. Thought so. David finished sealing the artery and moved to the next damaged organ. You know, General, most people send a fruit basket when they want to make friends. You guys apparently prefer the kidnap their medics during active combat approach. General Vel'kari's compound eyes focused on him with what David had learned to recognize as curiosity. You are not afraid. Oh, I'm terrified, David said cheerfully. But I'm also the only thing standing between you and meeting whatever God's giant space bugs pray to, so I'm channeling my terror into productive surgical precision. The truth was more complicated, but David had learned that complexity didn't play well when you're trying to keep someone alive under battlefield conditions. 3 weeks ago, the Ketharans had hit Kepler Station. David had been pulling 12-hour shifts in the emergency ward, treating refugees from the outer colonies. Then the bugs had hit the station itself. He'd been in surgery when the walls started exploding. Literally mid-operation, trying to save a kid who'd been caught in the first wave of attacks. The Ketheran soldiers had burst through the hospital wing, weapons ready, expecting resistance. Instead, they'd found one exhausted human doctor covered in blood, some of it his own, standing over an operating table, absolutely refusing to move. You want to shoot me? David had said that day, scalpel still in hand. Fine. But this kid doesn't die because you assholes can't tell the difference between a combat zone and a medical facility. Apparently that had made an impression. The human fleet, General Vel'kari wheezed now. They will demand my surrender. Probably. David was working on the second heart now. Ketheran anatomy was weird. Redundant organs, but all connected in ways that made no evolutionary sense. Question is, are you going to give it to them? I am, a general of the Ketheran Empire. I do not surrender. Right, honor duty, probably something about the glory of your hive-mind ancestors. David paused his work to look directly at the general. How's that working out for you so far? The bunker shook. Either the human fleet was getting closer, or something had just exploded. Possibly both. Your people, Vel'kari said slowly, are relentless. Yeah, we get that a lot. David went back to surgery. It's almost like we don't appreciate having our colonies bombed. Weird human quirk, I guess. The aide chittered something urgent. He says the bunker's shielding won't hold much longer. Vel'kari translated. Of course it won't. David was nearly done with the second heart. One more to go. You know what would be really helpful right now? If someone had thought to maybe, I don't know, not start a war with the species known for being absolutely batshit crazy when you threaten their civilians. Your reputation preceded you. Did it now? David moved to the third heart, the most damaged of the 3. This one was going to be tricky. What exactly did our reputation say? That humans are unpredictable, violent when cornered, that you fight without honor. David snorted. Without honor. Right. Because bombing refugee stations is super honorable. It was A military necessity. Military necessity. David's hands stilled for a moment.
Tell me, General, how many military targets were on Kepler Station? How many weapon emplacements? Strategic resources?
Silence. 0, David continued. It was a medical and refugee facility. The only military necessity was terrorizing civilians. He resumed his work, but his voice had an edge now. So forgive me if I'm not impressed by lectures about honor from someone whose idea of warfare involves targeting hospitals. The bunker shook again, harder this time. Why? Vel'kari asked suddenly. Why what? Why save me? Your people. They would understand. If you let me die. David considered this. It was a fair question. 3 weeks ago, if someone had told him he'd be performing life-saving surgery on a Kytheran general, he'd have recommended they get their head examined. You really want to know? Yes. Because I'm a doctor. David sealed another vessel. Because my job isn't to decide who lives and who dies based on their politics or their species or how many people they've killed. My job is to fix what's broken. Even if what is broken is your enemy. Especially then. David glanced up. Besides, you dying here doesn't bring back the people on Kepler Station. It just means more people are dead. The aide chittered again, more urgently. The human fleet is demanding to speak with whoever's in command, Vel'kari translated. They want immediate surrender of all Kytheran forces in this system. Sounds reasonable? David said. You did just finish bombing the crap out of their territory. If I surrender, you'll probably spend the rest of your life in a human prison. But you'll have a life to spend. David was working on the final repair now. You'll probably spend the rest of your life in a human prison, but you'll have a life to spend. David was working on the final repair now. If you don't surrender, you'll definitely be dead in about 10 minutes when my people realize diplomacy isn't working and decide to solve this problem with overwhelming firepower. Is that a threat? It's a medical opinion. David grinned without looking up. I've seen what human weapons do to biological targets. Trust me, you don't want to be on the receiving end. The third heart was more damaged than he'd initially thought. The projectile, some kind of human plasma rifle shot, if he was reading the wound pattern correctly, had torn through the organ and damaged the surrounding tissue. This was going to take finesse. Your people, they sent you here, knowing it was a trap? My people didn't send me anywhere. Your lieutenant dragged me here at gunpoint, remember? David used a micro-suture to repair a tiny tear in the heart wall. But if you're asking whether the human fleet knew where I was when they showed up to turn your army into space dust, yeah, probably. And they came anyway. Of course they came anyway. That's what we do. David finished the repair and started closing. Someone threatens our people, we show up with way too much firepower and absolutely no chill. It's kind of our thing. Even for one human? Especially for one human. David began the delicate process of sealing the chest cavity. See, that's what you never understood about us. We're not like you bugs with your hive mind and your collective consciousness. Every single human is irreplaceable. Every single human matters. The bunker's communication system crackled to life. A human voice speaking standard galactic. This is Admiral Rebecca Walsh of the Terran Federation Fleet. You have exactly 5 minutes to surrender all forces and release the human civilian you're holding. Or we will demonstrate why picking a fight with Terra was the worst decision your species has ever made. David whistled appreciatively. Admiral Walsh. She's got a reputation, you know. Something about turning an entire Zor-Blaxian fleet into scrap metal when they tried to blockade the Vega colonies. You know her? By reputation only, but she's definitely not the negotiate first type. David finished closing and began cleaning up. Congratulations, General. You're going to live. The question is whether you're going to live in a human prison, or as a very brief, very bright flash of light. Vel'kari tried to sit up, then thought better of it. The surgery, it is finished? All done. You'll be sore for a few days, and you'll need to take it easy for at least a week, but all 3 hearts are functioning normally. David started packing his instruments. I'd recommend avoiding getting shot for a while. It's bad for your health. The communication system crackled again. 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Tick-tock, David said helpfully. The aide was chittering frantically now, gesturing toward the bunker's exit. Other Kytheran soldiers were scuttling around, clearly preparing for either surrender or a fight. If I surrender, Vel'kari said slowly, what happens to my soldiers? That's between you and Admiral Walsh. But knowing humans, the ones who weren't directly involved in bombing civilians will probably get prisoner of war treatment. The ones who were, David shrugged. War crimes tribunals aren't fun, but they're better than being vaporized. And you? What happens to the human doctor who saved a Kithran general? David considered this.
Honestly, I'll probably get a medal and a lecture about not getting kidnapped by enemy forces.
Maybe a psychological evaluation to make sure I haven't developed Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome? It's when hostages start sympathizing with their captors, named after an old Earth incident. David finished packing. Though technically, I think what I have is more like Hippocratic Syndrome. I can't help but try to heal people, even when they're actively trying to kill me. The bunker shook again.
This time, dust fell from the ceiling. 3 minutes, the communication system announced.
Okay, General, decision time. David stood up, medical bag in hand.
What's it going to be? Surrender and live to see your bug children again, or die heroically in a bunker on a planet nobody's ever heard of?
Vel'kari was quiet for a long moment. David could hear the chittering of his soldiers, the hum of failing equipment, the distant rumble of human ships maintaining orbit. You said, every human matters. That's right. Even enemy humans? Even humans who oppose your government? David frowned.
Where are you going with this? There are human prisoners in the detention facility on Kethara Prime. Scientists, mostly.
Captured during our raids on your research stations.
David felt something cold settle in his stomach. How many? 47. 47 human scientists. Yes. And you're telling me this because... Vel'kari struggled to sit up again, this time successfully.
Because if I surrender, if I provide information about their location, your people might be able to save them.
David stared at him.
He could have died with that secret, but he didn't.
That doesn't make him a good person, Doctor.
No, David agreed. But it makes him a person who's trying to do the right thing, maybe for the first time in his life.
The bunker fell silent except for the hum of life support and the distant sound of human shuttles approaching.
Well, David said after a moment, this is going to be an interesting after-action report. Vel'kari made that wheezing sound again. I do not understand human expression. It means my commanding officers are going to have a lot of questions about how I ended up performing surgery on an enemy general who then surrendered his entire fleet. Will you be in trouble? David considered this. Probably, but not the fun kind of trouble where they give you medals and parade you around. More like the paperwork kind of trouble where you spend 6 months explaining your decisions to bureaucrats.
The sound of shuttles was getting closer.
Doctor, Vel'kari said quietly.
Yeah?
Thank you. David looked at him for a long moment. Thank me by making sure those 47 prisoners get home safe. I will. And General? Yes? Next time you want to make friends with humans, try the fruit basket approach. It's a lot less likely to get you shot.
The bunker door burst open, and human soldiers in full combat gear poured in, weapons raised. David raised his hands slowly, medical bag still in one hand.
Dr. David Kellner, Terran Medical Corps, he announced clearly. The alien general is my patient and has surrendered. The lead soldier, a lieutenant by his insignia, looked around the bunker with obvious confusion.
Sir, we were expecting heavy resistance.
Yeah, well, sometimes diplomacy works.
David gestured toward Vel'kari.
General Vel'kari, meet Lieutenant... Sorry, what's your name? Lieutenant Morrison, sir. Lieutenant Morrison. Lieutenant Morrison, General Vel'kari. He's surrendering his entire fleet and has information about human prisoners.
Morrison looked between David and the alien general with the expression of someone whose training had not covered this particular scenario.
Sir, Admiral Walsh wants to speak with you immediately.
I figured she would. David looked back at Vel'kari. Remember what I said about taking it easy.
And try not to get shot again.
I might not be around to patch you up next time.
Vel'kari nodded slowly.
Doctor, what you said about every human mattering.
Yeah?
Does that apply to former enemies as well? David paused at the bunker entrance.
I guess we're about to find out.
6 months later.
The Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Station were packed. Representatives from dozens of species filled the circular auditorium, their various chittering, humming, and vocalizations creating a constant background noise that David was still getting used to after 3 weeks of testimony. Dr. Kellner, the arbitrator said in her translated voice, you maintain that your decision to provide medical aid to General Vel'kari was based purely on medical ethics?
Yes, Your Honor.
David adjusted his formal uniform. He still felt ridiculous in dress blues, but Admiral Walsh had insisted. Something about representing humanity with dignity. Despite knowing his role in the attacks on human civilian targets? Your Honor, when someone is bleeding out in front of you, you don't stop to ask about their political affiliations. You stop the bleeding. A ripple of chittering from the Catharan delegation. Approval or disapproval, David couldn't tell. The prosecution argues, the arbitrator continued, that your actions constitute collaboration with enemy forces. David glanced over at the human prosecution team. He didn't recognize the lead prosecutor, some JAG officer from Terra Command. The guy had been going after David for 2 weeks now, arguing that treating enemy personnel during active combat was somehow treason. Your Honor, I was kidnapped by enemy forces and forced to provide medical aid under threat of execution. If that's collaboration, then I think we need to redefine the term. More chittering, this time from multiple delegations. The universal translator was having trouble keeping up. But you weren't being coerced when you convinced General Vel'kari to surrender, the prosecutor interjected. No, I wasn't. I was trying to prevent unnecessary deaths on both sides, including the death of a war criminal. David felt his temper rising, including the death of someone who had information that saved 47 human lives. The arbitrator raised one of her appendages for silence. The court will note that the prisoner exchange facilitated by General Vel'kari's surrender did result in the safe return of 47 human scientists previously presumed dead. Your Honor, the prosecutor continued, that doesn't change the fact that Dr. Kellner violated military protocol by objection. The voice came from the human defense table. Commander Sarah Liu, David's military lawyer, stood up. The prosecution is mischaracterizing Dr. Kellner's actions. He was operating under the Medical Corps' standing orders to provide aid to any injured personnel, regardless of species or political affiliation. Sustained. The arbitrator looked back to David. Dr. Kellner, in your professional opinion, what would have happened if you had refused to treat General Vel'kari? He would have died within minutes. All 3 of his major circulatory organs had been damaged by projectile weapons. And if he had died? David thought about this. The Catharan forces would have fought to the death rather than surrender. The human fleet would have been forced to destroy the entire bunker complex. The information about the prisoners would have died with him. So your decision to provide medical aid directly resulted in saving human lives? Yes, Your Honor. The arbitrator made some notes in her datapad. The court calls General Vel'kari to testify. There was a stir in the chamber as the Catharan general was escorted to the witness stand. He moved slowly, still recovering from his injuries, but his posture was straight and his compound eyes alert. General Vel'kari, the arbitrator began, you have pled guilty to war crimes in connection with attacks on human civilian targets. Why are you testifying on behalf of Dr. Kellner? Vel'kari's translator made his voice sound flat, emotionless. Because he saved my life when he had no obligation to do so. Because he treated me as a person, not as an enemy. Did Dr. Kellner know about the human prisoners when he treated you? No. I told him afterward when I decided to surrender. Why did you decide to surrender? Vel'kari was quiet for a long moment. Because Dr. Kellner showed me that humans value individual life above political advantage. Because he made me realize that the war I was fighting was wrong. The human prosecutor stood up. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defendant is a convicted war criminal who is serving a life sentence in human custody, the arbitrator interrupted, and whose testimony is relevant to the charges against Dr. Kellner. Continue, General. The doctor asked me a question, Vel'kari said slowly. He asked how many military targets were on the station we attacked. The answer was 0. It was a medical facility, a refugee center. I knew this when I ordered the attack. The chamber fell silent. But Dr. Kellner treated me anyway. He saved my life anyway. Even though I was responsible for killing his people, Vel'kari's translator couldn't convey emotion, but David could see the general's mandibles trembling slightly. In my culture, we believe that saving a life creates a debt. Dr. Kellner is owed a debt by every human who came home because of my surrender. Objection, the prosecutor said weakly. Overruled. The arbitrator looked directly at the general. General Vel'kari, in your opinion, did Dr. Kellner act appropriately? Dr. Kellner acted with honor. More honor than I showed in 30 years of military service. The prosecutor sat down, looking defeated. Thank you, General. The arbitrator made more notes. Dr. Kellner, please return to the stand. David walked back to the witness chair, still processing what Vel'kari had said. The general caught his eye as they passed, nodding slightly. Dr. Kellner, the arbitrator said once he was seated, the charges against you include violations of military protocol, unauthorized communication with enemy forces, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. How do you plead? David had been dreading this moment for 6 months. Your Honor, I plead guilty to violating military protocol. I was supposed to wait for authorization before treating enemy personnel.
I didn't. A murmur ran through the chamber. However, David continued, I don't plead guilty to the other charges. Communication with enemy forces was necessary to coordinate the surrender and prisoner exchange. And if saving lives is prejudicial to good order and discipline, then maybe we need to reconsider what good order and discipline actually mean. The arbitrator looked at her notes. The court finds the defendant guilty of violating military protocol regarding treatment of enemy personnel. David's heart sank. However, the court also finds that this violation was not only justified by circumstances, but resulted in significant strategic advantage for human forces and the saving of 47 human lives. The arbitrator looked up. Dr. Kellner, you are hereby reprimanded for failure to follow proper protocol. You are also awarded the Galactic Medal of Merit for extraordinary service in the preservation of life.
The chamber erupted.
David sat in stunned silence as representatives from dozens of species rose to their feet, chittering and vocalizing what sounded like approval. Furthermore, the arbitrator continued once the noise died down, this case highlights the need for revised protocols regarding medical personnel in combat situations. The court recommends that all Galactic Council member species adopt the Human Medical Corps' doctrine of universal medical aid, regardless of species or political affiliation. More eruption from the gallery. David looked over at the human delegation, where Admiral Walsh was smiling slightly. High praise from her. Court is adjourned. As the chamber began to empty, David remained in his seat, still processing what had just happened.
A reprimand and a medal. Only in the military.
Doctor. David looked up to see HFY approaching, flanked by his guards.
General, how are you feeling? Well, the human doctors say all 3 hearts are functioning normally.
HFY paused.
I wanted to thank you again. You don't need to keep thanking me. I was just doing my job.
No, you were doing more than your job. HFY gestured toward the chamber. This trial, this new policy, it will save lives, many lives. David stood up.
Yeah, well, maybe it'll prevent some future doctor from getting court-martialed for doing the right thing.
The 47 prisoners, they are all home safe?
All 47. The last one was released 3 weeks ago.
David smiled. Their families send their regards, by the way. HFY's mandibles moved in what David had learned was the Ketheran equivalent of a smile.
I am glad. General, can I ask you something?
Of course. Why? Why tell me about the prisoners? You could have kept that information, maybe used it to negotiate a better deal for yourself. HFY considered this, because you showed me that there was a better way. Because 47 lives mattered more than my pride. He paused.
And because I wanted to prove that even old bugs can learn new tricks. David laughed.
Did you just make a joke? I have been studying human humor. I am told it is an acquired taste. Yeah, well, you're getting there. David extended his hand.
Good luck, General. Try to stay out of trouble.
HFY looked at the offered hand for a moment, then carefully grasped it with one of his upper appendages.
Thank you, Dr. Kellner, for everything.
As the guards led HFY away, David was approached by a familiar figure.
Well, Doctor, Admiral Walsh said. That was interesting. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry about the... Don't apologize, you did the right thing. Walsh looked toward the departing Ketheran general. Though next time, maybe try to avoid getting kidnapped by enemy forces.
I'll do my best, ma'am.
See that you do. We can't have our best medics getting themselves court-martialed every time they save the galaxy. Walsh turned to go, then paused. Oh, and Doctor? Yes, ma'am? The President wants to meet you. Something about a new position heading up the Interspecies Medical Exchange Program. David blinked.
The what now? Apparently, the Galactic Council was impressed by your diplomatic skills.
They want to establish a formal program for medical cooperation between species. Interested? David thought about this. A chance to help establish protocols that might prevent future wars, or at least make them less bloody. A chance to make sure other doctors wouldn't face the choice between following orders and saving lives. Will there be more court-martials? Walsh smiled. Probably. Then I'm definitely interested. As David walked out of the Galactic Council chambers, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. 6 months ago, he'd been a simple trauma surgeon. Now he was apparently some kind of interspecies diplomat. His communicator chimed. A message from the refugee camp on Kepler Station. They needed a surgeon for incoming casualties from the Epsilon system. Some kind of mining accident. David smiled and changed course toward the shuttle bay. Diplomacy could wait. Right now, somewhere in the galaxy, people needed a doctor. And whether they were human, Ketheran, or something else entirely, that was all that mattered. Epilogue. 1 year later. The Interspecies Medical Exchange Program headquarters on Nexus Station was chaos, but it was organized chaos. David dodged a floating medical drone while reviewing patient files on his tablet, narrowly avoiding collision with a Zephyrian surgeon whose translator was apparently on the fritz. "Dr. Kellner?" His assistant called out, a young human named Alex who'd volunteered for the program straight out of medical school. "The Andromedan delegation is here for the trauma surgery seminar." "Great. Put them in conference room 3 and make sure the environmental controls are set for their atmospheric requirements." David looked up from his tablet. "And Alex? Check that the translator protocols are updated. Last time we had Andromedans here, the medical terminology kept getting translated as cooking instructions." "Yes, sir." David's communicator chimed. Another message, this one from Admiral Walsh. "Doctor, situation on Rigel 7. Species unknown, hostile to outside contact, but they're requesting medical aid." "Sound familiar, Walsh?" David grinned and typed back, "On my way. Try not to start a war before I get there. No promises. Transport leaves in 2 hours." David looked around the medical center he'd helped build. Doctors from 30 different species worked side by side, sharing knowledge and techniques that had already saved thousands of lives. It wasn't perfect. There were still cultural misunderstandings, translation errors, and the occasional diplomatic incident when someone accidentally violated someone else's medical taboos. But it was working. His communicator chimed again. This message was from an unexpected source. "Dr. Kellner, Kytheran medical facilities report 15% decrease in combat fatalities since implementing human triage protocols." "Thank you, General Vel'kari." David smiled and put away his tablet. He'd learned a lot in the past year about diplomacy, interspecies relations, and the complex politics of galactic medicine. But the most important lesson was the simplest one. Sometimes, the best way to change the galaxy was to save one life at a time. "Alex," he called out, grabbing his medical bag. "Cancel my afternoon appointments. I've got a house call to make." "Where to this time, sir?" "Rigel 7. Apparently they've got a situation that requires the human touch." "The diplomatic kind or the medical kind?" David headed toward the shuttle bay, already mentally reviewing xenobiology protocols for unknown species. "With any luck," he said over his shoulder, "there won't be a difference." After all, in David's experience, the best diplomacy was the kind that kept everyone breathing long enough to work out their differences. And if that meant occasionally performing surgery in hostile territory while enemy fleets circled overhead, well, that was just another Tuesday in the life of humanity's most unconventional diplomat. The shuttle bay doors opened, revealing the vast expanse of space beyond. Somewhere out there, people needed help. And whether they were human, Kytheran, or something else entirely, David Kellner would be there to provide it. Because in the end, that's what humans did. They showed up, they refused to back down, and they saved lives, even when those lives belonged to people who'd been trying to kill them just moments before. It was, Admiral Walsh had once observed, either humanity's greatest strength or their most dangerous weakness. David preferred to think of it as both. "Professor Zixthal, are you certain that crushing the human's breathing apparatus is the most efficient method?" The question came from somewhere in the back of the lecture hall, delivered in the chittering, musical language of the Vel'kari. It was a perfectly reasonable question, really. The kind that showed genuine academic curiosity and a healthy desire to optimize one's homicidal techniques. You know, normal college stuff. What made it slightly less normal was that the human's breathing apparatus they were discussing belonged to me. And I was sitting right there in the front row, taking notes. "Excellent question, Kst." Professor Zixthal's 4 eyes swiveled to focus on the student who'd spoken, while his remaining 2 stayed fixed on the holographic display showing a remarkably accurate 3D model of human anatomy. "The tracheal crush is indeed highly effective, but we must consider the human's surprisingly robust musculature around the neck region." I shifted in my seat. Well, seat being a generous term for what was essentially a mushroom-shaped protrusion that the Vel'kari used for perching. My human anatomy wasn't exactly designed for their furniture, but after 6 months at Kepler Interspecies University, I'd gotten used to the discomfort. It was either that or stand for 4-hour lectures, and my back wasn't nearly masochistic enough for that particular form of academic torture. "Now," the professor continued, gesturing with 2 of his 6 appendages, while the others manipulated the holographic controls. "Observe the density of the cervical vertebrae. A Vel'kari's natural grip strength of 340 pounds per square inch would be insufficient to achieve complete structural failure before the human could mount a counterattack." I jotted down 340 psi insufficient for neck snap in my notebook, right under exam 3 Tuesday,
and remember to buy more coffee. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was taking study notes for my own assassination. But hey, when you're the only human in a class called Xenobiology and Interspecies Conflict Resolution, and by conflict resolution, they clearly meant the permanent kind, you learn to roll with the punches, or in this case, the theoretical neck snapping. A student in the middle section raised what I'd learned to recognize as a hand, though it looked more like a cross between a tentacle and a tree branch. Professor, what about targeting the human's primary circulatory pump? Ah, the heart. Zixthal's mandibles twitched in what I'd learned was their equivalent of excitement. Kazatan brings up an excellent point. Let's examine the cardiac targeting options. The hologram zoomed in on my chest cavity, displaying my heart in loving detail. It was weird seeing your own internal organs floating in midair, complete with real-time blood flow animations. Like the world's most morbid screensaver. The human heart is located approximately here. The professor indicated with a laser pointer that probably cost more than my student loans. Protected by the ribcage structure. Now, conventional wisdom suggests a direct frontal assault through the sternum, but this approach has several disadvantages. 36 alien students leaned forward with the kind of attention usually reserved for free pizza announcements. I continued taking notes, because apparently my academic integrity was stronger than my survival instincts. Go figure. First, Zixthal counted off on his appendages. The human sternum is surprisingly dense, evolved to protect vital organs from the various predators of their homeworld. Second, the ribcage creates a narrow target window. And third, he paused for dramatic effect, which was impressive considering he didn't have eyebrows to raise. Humans have this peculiar tendency to move when you try to kill them. Polite chittering filled the lecture hall. Alien humor, everyone. It's apparently universal. However, the professor continued, pulling up a new diagram. The heart can be accessed much more efficiently from alternative angles. Observe the intercostal spaces, the gaps between the ribs, particularly at the 4th and 5th intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. I found myself unconsciously putting my hand over that exact spot. Old habits, you know? When someone's explaining the best way to stab you in the heart, protective gestures just sort of happen. The blade should be angled upward at approximately 45 degrees to avoid the lower rib margin and directed slightly medially to compensate for the heart's orientation within the thoracic cavity. This was getting uncomfortably detailed. I mean, I appreciated thoroughness in education. It's what I was paying those extortionate tuition fees for. But there's something uniquely unsettling about listening to your professor explain the optimal angle for piercing your own heart, while 36 alien students take careful notes. A Vel'kari near the front raised her appendage. Professor, wouldn't the approach vector be complicated by the human's typical clothing layers? Excellent observation, Kshra. The professor's enthusiasm was really something to behold. You had to admire someone who could get that excited about murder logistics. Human clothing does indeed present tactical considerations. Their fabric technology has advanced considerably, with some materials offering surprising resistance to penetration. I glanced down at my hoodie, a faded blue thing with Earth University printed across the front in letters that were peeling at the edges. Surprising resistance to penetration? It had holes in the elbows and a coffee stain that had achieved landmark status. If this was advanced fabric technology, humanity was in worse shape than I thought. Additionally, Zixthal continued, humans have this peculiar habit of layering their clothing, particularly in cooler climates. You might encounter anything from a simple textile barrier to multiple layers, including synthetic insulation and even metallic threading in some cases. Metallic threading? What kind of humans were they studying? I was wearing a hoodie and jeans, not medieval chainmail. Though given the current trajectory of this lecture, maybe I should look into upgrading my wardrobe. The professor manipulated the hologram again, this time showing various blade trajectories through what appeared to be different clothing configurations. It was like watching a very specialized, very disturbing physics simulation. Now let's discuss the approach methodology, he said, pulling up a new display. Stealth versus direct confrontation, environmental considerations, and the crucial element of surprise. A student I recognized as Thaxval raised his appendage. Professor, regarding the element of surprise, wouldn't the human social awareness make stealth approach difficult? Another excellent question. The professor was really in his element now. Human social awareness is indeed a significant factor. They possess remarkable peripheral vision adaptation and an almost supernatural ability to detect when they're being observed. It's believed to be an evolutionary holdover from their predator-rich homeworld environment. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Supernatural ability to detect observation? Half the time I didn't notice people standing right next to me until they spoke. Just last week, I'd spent 10 minutes looking for my glasses while they were on my head. Humanity's legendary awareness was clearly being somewhat overstated. But I kept quiet. This was their show, after all, and I was just here for the education. Both the official kind and the increasingly comprehensive how to murder me variety I was getting as a bonus. The key to successful stealth approach, Zixthal continued, lies in understanding human behavioral patterns. They tend to be less vigilant in familiar environments during routine activities and when distracted by their primitive communication devices. Primitive communication devices? I reflexively patted my pocket where my phone was currently buzzing with what were probably messages from my roommate asking if I'd picked up milk. Okay, maybe primitive was a bit harsh, but point taken. Environmental considerations are equally crucial. The professor went on, displaying what looked like a tactical analysis of various terrain types. Urban environments offer numerous concealment opportunities, but also present complications in terms of witness presence and escape route planning. The holographic display showed detailed schematics of city layouts, complete with sight lines, crowd density patterns, and what I was pretty sure were labeled optimal disposal locations. The level of detail was either impressively thorough or deeply concerning, possibly both. Rural environments. The display shifted to show wilderness areas, provide privacy and disposal advantages, but require greater planning in terms of approach routes and equipment transport. Equipment transport? What kind of equipment were we talking about here? I was starting to suspect this class went significantly beyond theoretical discussion. A student in the back section made a sound that I'd learned indicated a question. The professor gestured for them to proceed. What about the humans' pack behavior? Don't they typically travel in groups? Ah, excellent point, Xik. The professor's excitement was becoming genuinely concerning. Human pack dynamics are indeed a crucial tactical consideration. While they don't maintain the strict hierarchical structures of, say, Vel'kari hunting pods, they do exhibit strong social bonding and mutual protection instincts. Pack behavior? Mutual protection instincts? Had they been watching nature documentaries about humans? Because my pack mostly consisted of 3 roommates who couldn't agree on pizza toppings, let alone mount a coordinated defense against alien assassins. The key vulnerability in human pack structure, Zixthal continued, lies in their emotional attachment patterns. Remove or threaten a pack member's bonded individuals and their tactical thinking becomes significantly compromised. I thought about my friends back home, my roommates, my family. The professor wasn't wrong about the emotional attachment thing, but the way he was describing it made us sound like some kind of hive mind. We were just people who cared about each other. Was that really so tactically exploitable? Apparently, yes. This emotional vulnerability can be leveraged in several ways, the professor went on, and I was starting to really not like where this was heading. Isolation tactics, misdirection protocols, and what our military strategists call cascade targeting. Neutralizing pack members in sequence to maximize psychological impact on the primary target. Cascade targeting. They had a term for systematically murdering your friends and family to make killing you easier. I was definitely writing a very stern review of this university's course catalog when I got home. Assuming I got home, which, given the current trajectory of this educational experience, was looking increasingly uncertain. The hologram shifted again, this time showing what appeared to be social network diagrams with various elimination sequences marked out in different colors. It looked like a cross between a family tree and a very efficient genocide flowchart. Now, Professor Zixthal said, let's examine specific physiological vulnerabilities unique to human anatomy. Here we go. I'd been wondering when they'd get to the really fun stuff. Humans, unlike most spacefaring species, evolved from persistence hunters on a high-gravity world with significant atmospheric pressure. This has resulted in several unique anatomical features that present both challenges and opportunities. The hologram returned to the full-body human anatomy display, this time with various systems highlighted in different colors. I recognized cardiovascular, nervous, respiratory, and what looked like the musculoskeletal system. Everything you'd need for a comprehensive murder tutorial. Their cardiovascular system, while robust, has several critical failure points beyond the primary cardiac muscle. The professor indicated various arteries and veins with his laser pointer. The carotid arteries here, the femoral arteries here, and the brachial arteries here all represent high-flow vessels whose severance would result in rapid incapacitation. I unconsciously put my hands over my neck, then my inner thighs, then my upper arms. It was like playing the world's most morbid version of Simon Says. Pressure point application can also be highly effective, Zixthal continued, zooming in on the neck region. The carotid sinus, when compressed properly, triggers a parasympathetic response that results in unconsciousness within 8 to 12 seconds. 8 to 12 seconds.
That was actually pretty accurate. I'd done some martial arts back on Earth, and that timing was spot on for a proper carotid choke, which meant either these aliens had done some very thorough research, or they'd had practical experience. I was hoping for the former, but increasingly suspecting the latter. The human nervous system also presents interesting vulnerabilities. The professor moved on, highlighting the spinal column and brain. Their central nervous system is heavily centralized, with critical junction points at the base of the skull and various vertebral levels. The display showed pressure points, nerve clusters, and what I was pretty sure were labeled optimal disruption angles. It was like watching a medical textbook designed by assassins. Particularly vulnerable are the C1 and C2 vertebrae. He indicated the top of the spine, where even minor displacement can result in immediate paralysis or death. The occipital region here, where the spine meets the skull, is especially fragile. I reached up and felt the base of my skull, where my neck met my head. It felt pretty solid to me, but then again, I wasn't a six-armed alien professor with apparent expertise in cross-species murder techniques. A student raised her appendage. "Professor, what about their recovery capabilities? Don't humans have unusually high pain tolerance and healing rates?" Yes. The professor's mandibles did that excited twitching thing again. Human recovery capabilities are indeed remarkable and represent a significant tactical consideration. Their pain tolerance is approximately 40% higher than the galactic average, and their healing rate for non-critical injuries is among the fastest recorded. 40% higher pain tolerance? I stubbed my toe last week and complained about it for 2 days. Either the galactic average for pain tolerance was pathetically low, or humans were tougher than I'd given us credit for. This presents both challenges and opportunities, Zixthal continued. Standard incapacitation techniques may prove insufficient, requiring more decisive methods. However, their high metabolism and healing rate also means they consume more resources and require more frequent nutritional intake, presenting vulnerability windows. Vulnerability windows through hunger? I mean, I did get pretty cranky when I missed meals, but I didn't think it made me significantly easier to murder, though maybe I'd never been hungry enough to find out. Additionally, the professor went on, their recovery capabilities are heavily dependent on their sleep cycles. Humans require approximately 7 to 9 hours of unconsciousness every 24-hour period, during which their defensive awareness drops to near zero levels. Sleep-based assassination. Of course. I made a mental note to start sleeping with one eye open, then realized that was physically impossible for humans. Another design flaw to add to the list, apparently. The lecture continued for another hour, covering topics that ranged from environmental toxins effective against human physiology, to exploiting human psychological vulnerabilities to something called post-termination disposal considerations. It was comprehensive, thorough, and absolutely terrifying. Through it all, I kept taking notes. Partly because I'm a compulsive note-taker. It's a nervous habit. And partly because I was genuinely curious about how accurate their information was. From what I could tell, they'd done their homework. The physiological stuff was mostly correct. The behavioral observations were surprisingly insightful. And their tactical analysis was, well, it was more thorough than I was comfortable with. The professor was just beginning to wrap up with something called verification protocols, ensuring target neutralization when the chimes sounded, indicating the end of the class period. "Excellent work today, everyone," Professor Zixthal announced as students began gathering their materials. "Don't forget that your practical assessment is scheduled for next week. You'll be working in teams of 3 to develop comprehensive elimination strategies for your assigned target species. Practical assessment, teams of 3, elimination strategies." This was definitely not your typical college course. As the other students filed out, chattering among themselves in their various languages about study groups and project partnerships, I remained seated. This seemed like an appropriate time for some clarification. "Professor Zixthal?" I called out as the lecture hall emptied. "Yes, Mr. Bennett?" He turned his attention to me, all 6 eyes focusing with an intensity that made me slightly uncomfortable. "Did you have questions about today's material?" "Well, yes, actually. Several questions." I stood up from my mushroom perch and walked down to the front of the lecture hall, where the professor was organizing his materials with 4 arms, while the other 2 continued manipulating the holographic display. "First," I said, "I'm curious about your source material. Where did you get all this information about human anatomy and behavior?" Excellent question." His enthusiasm was undiminished. "We have access to extensive databases compiled by the Galactic Survey Corps,
as well as detailed reports from first contact scenarios and observational studies. Quite comprehensive, really. I see. And the tactical information? The elimination strategies and vulnerability assessments? Military intelligence archives, primarily, he said matter-of-factly, as if we were discussing library resources. The Vel'kari Defense Forces maintain detailed threat assessment profiles for all known species, standard procedure for any potential conflict scenario. Potential conflict scenario. Right. Because apparently humanity was considered enough of a threat to warrant comprehensive assassination protocols. Professor, I said carefully, are you aware that I'm human? All 6 of his eyes blinked in sequence. A response I'd learned indicated surprise or confusion. Of course I'm aware, Mr. Bennett. You're listed on my class roster as Terran exchange student, species designation human. Your enrollment paperwork was quite clear on that point. And you're comfortable with teaching a class on how to kill humans. To a human. He paused in his material organizing, all 6 eyes focusing on me with what I was starting to recognize as genuine puzzlement. Mr. Bennett, are you under the impression that this course is designed to teach students how to kill humans? Now it was my turn to look confused. Well, yes. I mean, you spent 2 hours explaining optimal strategies for murdering members of my species. The course is called Xenobiology and Interspecies Conflict Resolution. And by conflict resolution, you clearly mean... Oh my, the professor interrupted, his mandibles twitching in what I'd learned was the Vel'kari equivalent of laughter. Oh my, Mr. Bennett, I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Yes, quite significant indeed. He set down his materials and turned to face me fully. Mr. Bennett, this course is not designed to teach students how to kill humans. It's designed to teach them how not to accidentally kill humans. I stared at him. Come again? The course title, Mr. Bennett, Xenobiology and Interspecies Conflict Resolution. The conflict we're trying to resolve is the unfortunate tendency of Vel'kari students to accidentally kill their human classmates through ignorance of human fragility. The universe suddenly made a lot more sense and a lot less sense simultaneously. You see, Professor Zixthal continued, when the university first began accepting human exchange students 3 years ago, we had several incidents. Nothing malicious, you understand, just cultural misunderstandings and physiological incompatibilities. Incidents? Well, there was the Welcome Week mixer where Kesdet Han tried to demonstrate traditional Vel'kari friendship bonding by lifting a human student overhead and shaking him vigorously. The human required extensive medical treatment for what your species calls whiplash. I winced. Ouch. Then there was the study group incident where several students attempted to help their human teammates stay awake for finals by applying pressure to what they believed were alertness enhancement points on his neck. They were, unfortunately, applying pressure to his carotid arteries instead. That could have been bad. Quite bad, yes. The human lost consciousness and required emergency intervention. And then there was the unfortunate misunderstanding about human dietary requirements during the field biology expedition, where students attempted to share their traditional high-energy food paste with their human teammates. What was wrong with the food paste? It contained several compounds that are highly toxic to human physiology. The concentration of what you call heavy metals alone would have been lethal within hours. I was starting to get the picture. So this class is designed to teach our students how to interact safely with humans without accidentally causing injury or death. The professor finished. Everything we covered today, the physiological vulnerabilities, the behavioral patterns, the environmental considerations, it's all intended to help students understand what not to do around their human classmates. The assassination techniques are examples of exactly the kinds of accidents we're trying to prevent. When you understand how easily a human can be killed, you become much more careful about your interactions with them. I thought back over the lecture, recontextualizing everything I'd heard. The detailed vulnerability assessments, the behavioral analysis, the tactical considerations, all of it designed not to facilitate murder, but to prevent accidental homicide. So when you talked about pressure points and nerve clusters, we were teaching students to avoid applying pressure to those areas during normal social contact. Vel'kari greeting rituals involve considerable physical contact that could be harmful to humans if applied incorrectly. And the stuff about sleep cycles and nutritional requirements? Essential information for roommate compatibility and social planning. If you understand that humans require specific rest periods and have narrow dietary tolerances, you're less likely to accidentally poison them or disrupt their health through well-intentioned social activities. I sat down heavily on one of the mushroom perches, my brain trying to process this complete recontextualization of the last 2 hours. Mr. Bennett, the professor continued, I'm curious, why didn't you speak up during the lecture if you believed we were teaching assassination techniques? That was a good question.
Why hadn't I said anything? Honestly?
I wasn't sure if I was misunderstanding something, and I didn't want to seem culturally insensitive by assuming the worst. Plus, the information was actually pretty accurate, from a human anatomy perspective. I figured even if it was a murder class, at least it was a well-researched murder class. Professor Zichthal's mandibles twitched again. Mr. Bennett, your presence in this class has been invaluable for exactly that reason. Having an actual human available to verify our information and provide real-time feedback on our assumptions has significantly improved the accuracy of our safety protocols. So I'm not just a student, I'm a test subject? Consultant, he corrected. You're a consultant. And speaking of which, I was hoping you might be willing to help with something. What kind of something? The practical assessment I mentioned, where students develop comprehensive safety protocols for interacting with their assigned species. This semester, all the teams are focusing on human Vel'kari interaction safety. And you want me to help evaluate their protocols, provide feedback on their assumptions, correct any misconceptions, and help them understand the real-world applications of their safety planning. I considered this. It was certainly better than being the subject of theoretical murder discussions, and it might actually be useful for preventing future incidents. What would that involve exactly? Each team will present their safety protocol to you, and you'll provide feedback on its effectiveness. Think of it as a practical examination where you're both the test subject and the examiner. Will I be compensated for this consulting work? Of course. The university standard rate for expert consultation is quite generous. I thought about my student loan balance and my part-time job at the campus bookstore that barely covered my coffee addiction. I'm interested, but I have some conditions. Such as? First, I want a complete copy of all the research materials you've been using. If I'm going to be consulting on human safety protocols, I should know what information you're working with. Perfectly reasonable. Second, I want input on the curriculum. If there are gaps in your understanding of human physiology or behavior, I want to be able to address them directly. Absolutely, your insights would be invaluable. And third, I paused, realizing I was about to make a request that would either be brilliant or catastrophically stupid. I want to audit the advanced course. Advanced course? You mentioned this is the introductory class. There must be higher-level courses that cover more complex interaction protocols, right? Professor Zichthal's eyes blinked in sequence again. Mr. Bennett, the advanced course covers interaction protocols for multiple species simultaneously. It includes sections on interspecies group dynamics, complex social hierarchies, and cross-cultural conflict prevention. It's quite intensive. Sounds perfect. You do realize that you would be the only human in a class designed to teach safe interaction with humans, among other species? Professor, I just spent 2 hours listening to a detailed lecture on optimal methods for killing me, and I took notes. I think I can handle whatever weirdness the advanced class has to offer. His mandibles twitched in what I was learning to interpret as amusement. Very well, Mr. Bennett. I'll speak with the administration about adding you to both the consultation roster and the advanced course enrollment. Excellent. I gathered my notes and headed toward the exit. Same time next week for the practical assessments? Same time next week, he confirmed. And Mr. Bennett? I turned back. Yes? Thank you for not filing a complaint with the university administration about what you perceived as assassination instruction. That could have been problematic. I grinned. Professor, this has been the most educational class I've ever taken. Why would I complain about that? Epilogue. 3 weeks later. Mr. Bennett, could you please explain why Team 7's protocol for human calming techniques would result in immediate unconsciousness? I looked at the holographic display showing a Vel'kari student demonstrating what they believed was a soothing neck massage on a human-shaped practice dummy. The dummy's head was lolling at an angle that suggested severe spinal injury. Well, Professor, they're applying approximately 200 pounds of pressure directly to the carotid arteries, while simultaneously hyperextending the cervical vertebrae. It's less calming technique and more accidental execution. The 3 students on Team 7 chittered nervously while frantically taking notes. I see, Professor Zichthal said. And the correct approach would be? Light pressure, if any. Humans don't actually require physical manipulation to achieve relaxation.
Usually just reducing environmental stressors and allowing rest time is sufficient. Fascinating, one of the Team 7 students said. So humans can achieve calm states without external intervention? Most of the time, yes. We're not as high maintenance as your research suggests. I was enjoying this consulting work more than I'd expected. It turned out that being the expert on your own species was both easier and more complicated than it sounded. Easier because I actually knew what it felt like to be human. More complicated because I'd never had to explain the experience to someone whose baseline assumptions were completely different. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of practical assessments, safety protocol evaluations, and increasingly surreal conversations about human behavior. Each team of Vel'kari students had developed elaborate safety protocols based on thorough research and completely wrong assumptions. Team 8, for instance, had created optimal human exercise protocols for improved academic performance that looked suspiciously like medieval torture devices. Their high-intensity cardiovascular enhancement would have killed most humans within minutes. Team 8, I'd explained patiently. Persistence hunting means we can walk for a really long time, not that we can survive being attached to high-voltage exercise equipment. There's a difference between endurance and invulnerability. Team 9 had developed human social integration protocols involving something called aggressive friendship bonding that included physical displays of affection scaled for Vel'kari physiology. Watching them demonstrate proper human hugging technique while their practice dummies' ribs audibly cracked had been both hilarious and terrifying. Just because something won't kill us doesn't mean it's pleasant, I'd told them. Human social bonding is more about emotional connection and shared experiences, not testing the structural limits of our skeletal system. But my favorite had been Team 12's Human Emotional Support Protocol, which involved analyzing micro-expressions, monitoring vocal stress patterns, and calculating optimal empathy responses using complex algorithms. You don't calculate empathy, I'd explained. You just feel it, or at least pretend to feel it convincingly. Most of the time, humans just want acknowledgement and understanding, not algorithmic solutions to their problems. The concept of authentic interaction had apparently blown their minds. The idea that social connection could be effective without being predictable was revolutionary to them. You mean relationships should be genuine rather than optimized for specific outcomes? One student had asked, taking frantic notes. Exactly. Humans can usually tell when someone is following a social script versus actually engaging with them as individuals. Professor Zixthal had been taking as many notes as his students. Imperfect caring is superior to perfect indifference, he'd summarized, and I'd nodded. That's actually a pretty good way to put it. Now, 3 weeks into my unexpected career as an interspecies safety consultant, I'd developed something of a reputation on campus. Word had gotten around that there was a human who could explain why certain well-intentioned alien behaviors would result in accidental homicide. I'd started getting consultation requests from other departments. Yesterday, the quantum physics department had asked me to review their human-safe laboratory protocols after a minor incident involving a graduate student who'd been accidentally phased slightly out of normal space-time during what was supposed to be a routine equipment demonstration. He'd spent 6 hours existing in a parallel dimension before they figured out how to bring him back. The temporal displacement was minimal, the department head had assured me. Only 6 hours, and he returned to the exact same spatial coordinates. That's not really the point, I'd replied. The point is that you probably shouldn't be experimenting with dimensional manipulation around humans without extensive safety protocols. But the calculations indicated perfectly safe parameters for carbon-based life forms. Did your calculations account for human psychological reactions to existing in parallel dimensions? Because I'm pretty sure that's not covered in standard carbon-based life form specifications. It was becoming clear that alien understanding of humans fell into 2 categories: incredibly detailed technical knowledge of our physiology, and complete bewilderment about our psychological and social needs. They could calculate exactly how much pressure it would take to crack a human ribcage, but they had no idea that humans might find parallel dimension exposure emotionally traumatic. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate. "How's the consulting business?" I texted back. Just prevented the quantum physics department from accidentally phasing more students into parallel dimensions. Typical Tuesday. Your life is weird, dude. Tell me about it. The advanced course that Professor Zixthal had promised was starting next week, and I was actually looking forward to it. After 3 weeks of consulting on human safety protocols, I was curious to see how these same challenges played out with multiple species interacting simultaneously. Mr. Bennett, the professor approached as the last of the Team 7 students filed out, still muttering about bubble dynamics and appropriate pressure thresholds.
I wanted to thank you again for your consultation work. The insights you've provided have been invaluable.
Happy to help, Professor. It's been educational for me, too.
Oh, how so? Well, it turns out I knew a lot less about being human than I thought I did. Having to explain it to someone else made me think about things I'd always taken for granted. Such as? Personal space, for instance. I never really thought about it as an invisible bubble before, but that's exactly what it is. And the friendship thing. I'd never tried to articulate what actually makes humans feel comfortable around each other. The advanced course begins next week, he reminded me. Are you still interested in auditing? Absolutely. What species are we covering? Next semester focuses on multi-species team dynamics. We'll be examining real case studies of interspecies cooperation failures and developing protocols for complex social hierarchies. The species mix includes Zephyrians, crystallines, hive minds, membrane entities, and quantum phase entities. Quantum phase entities? Beings who exist partially outside normal spacetime. They have very specific communication requirements and extremely volatile reaction patterns to perceived threats. Last year, a student accidentally caused a quantum phase entity to shift 3 of his classmates 2 hours into the past. It was quite disruptive to the class schedule. Time travel accidents, right? I was beginning to understand why interspecies education required such comprehensive safety protocols. Sounds like exactly the kind of challenge I'm looking for. Excellent. I'll have the enrollment processed by tomorrow. As I walked back across campus, I reflected on how dramatically my understanding of the universe had shifted in just a few weeks. I'd come to Kepler University thinking I was just another exchange student, maybe a little exotic, but fundamentally unremarkable. Instead, I'd discovered that humans were apparently considered so fragile and unpredictable that an entire academic course was required to teach other species how to interact with us without causing accidental death or injury. We were the galactic equivalent of soap bubbles, beautiful, complex, and liable to pop if you looked at us wrong. But here's the thing that really got me. They cared enough to create the course. Think about it. The Vel'kari could have just said, humans are too fragile for interspecies education. Let's not bother. Instead, they developed comprehensive safety protocols, hired expert instructors, and required all their students to learn proper human interaction techniques. They wanted us here badly enough to completely redesign their social integration programs. That wasn't just accommodation. That was genuine interspecies cooperation. It was them saying, these fragile soap bubble humans have something valuable to contribute, so let's figure out how to work with them safely. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate. Movie night tomorrow? Found something called Galactic Conquest 7, The Reckoning. I texted back. Sure, but I'm picking the snacks. Apparently our food choices are more complicated than I realized. Long story. Involves accidental poisoning and heavy metal toxicity. Your classes are weird, dude. I laughed. If he only knew. By the time I got back to my dorm that evening, I had a completely different perspective on my place in the universe. I wasn't just a fragile human taking notes in alien murder classes. I was a cultural bridge specialist, helping different species understand each other well enough to avoid accidentally killing anyone. It was a good job. Dangerous, occasionally terrifying, but good. Tomorrow, I had my first meeting with the university administration about developing a formal cultural bridge specialist program. Apparently, my success with the Vel'kari safety protocols had caught the attention of the Dean of Interspecies Relations. Mr. Bennett, Dean QRX-Tal had said during our preliminary discussion. Your work has prevented more accidental deaths in 3 weeks than our previous safety protocols managed in 3 years. We're very interested in expanding your role. The formal program would involve consulting with multiple departments, developing safety protocols for various species combinations, and eventually training other cultural bridge specialists. It was exactly the kind of work I'd never known I wanted to do. My roommate was in the common room when I got back, watching what appeared to be a Vel'kari action movie complete with dramatic hierarchy displays and elaborate combat choreography. How was class? He asked without looking away from the screen. Educational. Learned about cascade failure patterns in multi-species team environments, and why you should never attempt to calm a human by applying pressure to their carotid arteries. Cool. Pizza? Sure, but let me check the ingredient list first. Apparently some of our food choices have broader implications than I realized. Dude, you're getting weird about food. Dude, I'm getting weird about not accidentally poisoning my alien classmates. He looked at me then. Wait, what? I grinned. Long story. Involves cultural misunderstandings, reproduction under stress, and combat displays as conflict resolution. Your classes are definitely weirder than mine. I settled in to watch incomprehensible alien action sequences while eating carefully vetted pizza. All things considered, it had been a pretty good day in my completely unexpected career as an interspecies relations consultant. Next week, I'd be starting the advanced course on multi-species team dynamics, learning about quantum phase entities that could accidentally send people back in time, and hopefully avoiding any temporal displacement incidents of my own. It turned out that accidentally enrolling in what I thought was an alien murder class was the best career move I'd ever made. Who would have thought that the key to successful interspecies relations was simply making sure everyone understood each other well enough to avoid accidental homicide? Sometimes the best education comes from the classes you never meant to take. And sometimes the most important job you'll ever have is one that doesn't even exist until you accidentally create it by sitting through a lecture on optimal human elimination techniques while taking notes. I raised my slice of pizza in a toast to the universe's sense of irony. Here's to misunderstandings that lead to understanding, to fragile humans who turn out to be surprisingly adaptable, and to alien professors who care enough about not accidentally killing their students to develop comprehensive murder prevention curricula. The future of interspecies relations was looking bright, as long as nobody got accidentally phased into parallel dimensions or time displaced during the learning process. Though knowing my luck, that was probably exactly what would happen next week.